The Saturday morning air in the Oakhaven subdivision was thick with the scent of cut grass and the drone of distant leaf blowers. A carefully curated symphony of suburban tranquility. Inside, at 128 Magnolia Trace, Clinton Dorsey was showing his 10-year-old son, Terrell, how to properly tamp earth. Their hands covered in the rich, dark soil of their corner of Georgia. They were reinforcing the modest earthen berm at the very edge of their property line. A project born not of aesthetics, but of desperation. "See how you pack it down," Clinton said, his voice a low, patient rumble. "You want it tight, so the water respects it." Terrell, his face smudged with dirt, nodded seriously. "Respects it. Dad." "That's right. Water's like anything else. It'll follow the path of least resistance. We just have to give it a better path to follow." The berm, no more than 18 inches high and reinforced with river rock, was Clinton's answer to years of soggy carpets and the persistent, cloying smell of mildew that clung to their basement. It was his stand against the anxiety that coiled in his wife Denise's stomach every time the weather forecast turned gray. More than anything, it was for Terrell, whose asthma flared with every damp season, the wheeze in his small chest a constant, terrifying reminder of the moisture seeping through their foundation. Their quiet lesson was interrupted by the precise, clipped sound of car doors closing. Clinton glanced up to see a pristine white sedan parked at his curb. Two figures emerged. The first was a young man in a polo shirt, emblazoned with a corporate logo, Action Property Management. He clutched a tablet and wore an expression of nervous importance. The second was Geraldine Kavanaugh. Geraldine, the president of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association, moved with the unhurried certainty of a ship's captain navigating her own vessel. In her late 60s, with her silver hair sculpted into a helmet of unflappable order, and her glasses perched on her nose like a judge's gavel, she carried a clipboard as if it were a scepter. They didn't use the paved walkway. They marched directly across the manicured lawn, their shoes leaving faint impressions in the damp grass. Terrell instinctively took a step closer to his father. "Mr. Dorsey," Geraldine began, her voice devoid of neighborly warmth. It was the voice she used for official business, which, for Geraldine, was all business. "This is Kyle from Action Property Management. We're conducting a routine community standards inspection." Clinton wiped his hands on his jeans, standing his ground. "Good morning. Geraldine, Kyle." Geraldine's eyes bypassed him, fixing on the berm. Kyle, on cue, lifted his tablet and took a photo, the synthetic click of the digital shutter sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. "This structure," Geraldine said, gesturing with her pen, "is an unapproved alteration. It constitutes a clear violation of the association's Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions." She recited the next part from memory, her tone cold and liturgical. Specifically, CCNR Section 8.4.2, no structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot which may damage or interfere with any easement for the installation or maintenance of utilities, or which may unreasonably change, obstruct, or retard the flow of surface water in any drainage channel or swale. Clinton felt a familiar prickle of frustration. "Geraldine, this berm doesn't obstruct anything. It redirects the runoff that floods my basement and Shirley Ramos's garden every year. It's built entirely on my property, right at the edge of the common area drainage easement. Your interpretation of the easement's function is irrelevant, Mr. Dorsey," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "The document is clear. You have altered the established drainage profile of your lot without submitting an architectural request and without approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair." The humiliation was a hot flush on Clinton's neck. He was being lectured like a schoolboy on his own property, in front of his son. He could feel Terrell's small frame tense beside him. "I'm protecting my home," Clinton said, his voice calm but firm, each word chosen to carry weight, "and my son's health." Geraldine's expression remained a mask of procedural indifference. She made a crisp note on her clipboard. "You will be receiving official correspondence from the management company. I suggest you take it seriously." She turned, her duty discharged, and marched back toward her car. Kyle offered Clinton a brief, apologetic shrug before scurrying after her, as the sedan pulled away. Terrell looked up at his father, his young face clouded with confusion. "Dad, what did we do wrong?" Clinton placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder, the grit of the soil transferring from his palm to the clean fabric of Terrell's t-shirt. "Nothing. Son, we did exactly what was right." But as he stared at the berm, a bastion of common sense in a world governed by binders and bylaws, he felt a cold certainty that doing what was right was about to become very, very difficult. The history of flooding at 128 Magnolia Trace wasn't written in dramatic headlines. It was chronicled in the small, corrosive details of daily life. It was the dehumidifier that ran constantly in the basement, its low hum a permanent part of the house's soundscape. It was the stack of plastic storage bins, replacing the cardboard boxes that had disintegrated into mush 2 summers ago, taking with them a box of Terrell's kindergarten drawings and Denise's wedding album. Most of all, it was the smell, a stubborn, earthy odor of damp concrete and mildew that no amount of bleach or scented candles could ever fully conquer. It clung to the guest room linens stored downstairs and greeted Clinton every time he opened the basement door. For Denise, the smell was a barometer of anxiety. On dry, sunny days, it was a faint memory. But when the sky turned a bruised purple and the humidity pressed down, the smell seemed to rise through the floorboards, a ghostly reminder of the water lurking just beyond their foundation. She'd start compulsively checking the weather app on her phone, her thumb swiping through hourly forecasts, as if she could will the storm systems to divert. The problem was the lay of the land. Oakhaven was built on gently rolling hills, and the Dorsey's lot sat at the bottom of a long, gradual slope. Behind their property line was a common area, a strip of HOA-maintained land that contained a wide, shallow depression designated as an overland drainage easement. In theory, it was designed to channel rainwater harmlessly toward the storm drains at the end of the street. In reality, years of erosion and neglect had turned it into a chute. During heavy rains, water would sheet down the hill, gather speed, and slam into the back of the Dorsey's property, overwhelming the yard and pushing relentlessly against the house itself. Last year had been the worst. A summer squall had dumped 4 inches of rain in under an hour. Clinton had been at work, and Denise had called him in a panic. He'd rushed home to find a river of muddy water sluicing through his backyard, pooling against the basement door. He and Denise spent hours bailing water with buckets, their backs aching, their shoes soaked. The water still won. It seeped under the doorframe, spreading across the concrete floor, ruining the new laminate flooring they had just installed. Shirley Ramos, their neighbor 2 doors down, had it just as bad. An elderly widow on a fixed income. Her vegetable garden was her pride and joy. The same storm had turned her meticulously tended rows of tomatoes and cucumbers into a swampy mess. Clinton had helped her dig a makeshift trench with a shovel, but most of her plants were lost. Every year. It's the same heartbreak, she'd told him, her voice thin with resignation. But the final straw for Clinton had been Terrell's doctor's appointment last fall. His son's asthma, usually manageable, had become persistent. The pediatrician, a kind woman with tired eyes, had been direct. "The dampness in your home isn't helping," she'd said, looking at Clinton over her glasses. "Mold and mildew are serious triggers for asthmatic children. You need to find the source and eliminate it." That night, Clinton had gone down to the basement alone. He ran his hand along the cool concrete wall, feeling the faint, perpetual dampness. He looked at the water stains along the baseboards. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about his son's next breath. He spent the next 2 months researching, planning, and building. He consulted with a friend in construction, studied drainage principles online, and carefully surveyed his property line. The berm was his solution, simple, effective, and built entirely on his own land. It didn't block the easement. It simply intercepted the water before it could gain momentum, gently redirecting the main flow toward the center of the swale, just as it was supposed to function. For the first time in a decade, the spring rains had been a nuisance, not a threat. The basement stayed bone dry. Shirley's garden flourished. Frank Ellery, a retired county surveyor who lived across the street, had stopped him at the mailbox one afternoon. "That's a smart piece of engineering you did back there. Clinton, slows the water down perfectly. I haven't had to sweep silt off my driveway once this season." The berm worked. It protected his family. It helped his neighbors. It was the very definition of a responsible, proactive solution. And now, according to Geraldine Kavanaugh's clipboard, it was a 5-figure problem. The system, Clinton was beginning to realize, wasn't designed to solve problems. It was designed to enforce rules, even when the rules themselves were the problem. Part 3. The inciting incident. The system's first official move arrived not with a bang, but with a sterile, corporate chime from Clinton's laptop. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the lawn inspection. The email sat in his inbox, its subject line a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. Subject courtesy notice, potential covenant violation at 128 Magnolia Trace. The sender was Kyle Brenner, the young property manager from Action Property Management. The tone of the email was meticulously polite, stripped of any human emotion, as if generated by an algorithm designed to minimize legal liability. Dear Mr. Dorsey, for the sake of clarity and to ensure all homeowners are aware of community standards, we are writing to inform you of a potential violation of the Oakhaven HOA's governing documents observed at your property on Saturday, August 19, 2023. The potential violation pertains to an unapproved alteration to the landscaping and ground level at the rear of your property, as cited by the board president during the inspection. This is in potential conflict with CC&R 408.4.2, alterations affecting drainage. This email serves as a courtesy notice. Its purpose is to bring this matter to your attention in an informal capacity. We kindly request that you voluntarily remove the unapproved earthen berm and restore the area to its original state within the next 7 days to avoid further action. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the standards that make Oakhaven a desirable community for all residents. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Kyle Brenner, Community Manager, Action Property Management, on behalf of the Oakhaven HOA Board of Directors. Clinton read it twice, then a third time. Courtesy notice. The word choice was deliberate, designed to sound helpful and non-confrontational, while being the exact opposite. It was the first shot fired, wrapped in the velvet glove of corporate procedure. Denise leaned over his shoulder, reading the screen. Voluntarily remove it. Do they think you built it for fun? They don't think, Clinton muttered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. They process. This isn't from a person. It's from a system. He spent the next hour crafting a reply. He was respectful, but firm, methodical in his reasoning. He explained the history of the flooding, the damage to his and his neighbors' properties, and the positive effect the berm had already demonstrated. He attached photos of the previous year's water damage and a short, clear video showing how the berm was now functioning during a recent downpour, gently channeling the water without obstruction. He emphasized that the structure was entirely on his private lot and was built to support, not interfere with, the function of the common area easement. He concluded his email with a simple, reasonable request. Given the evidence and the direct benefit to multiple properties, I believe the berm is not a violation, but a necessary and responsible improvement. I request that the board reconsider its position, or, alternatively, schedule a site visit with the full Architectural Review Committee to observe its function firsthand. I am confident that upon review, they will agree it serves the best interests of the community. He hit send and leaned back, a small knot of hope tightening in his chest. Logic, evidence, reason, surely these things still mattered. Surely a board of his own neighbors would see the sense in what he had done. For a week, there was only silence. The system, it seemed, was digesting his response. Clinton found himself checking his email more often than usual, a low-grade hum of anxiety running beneath the surface of his days. Maybe they were actually discussing it. Maybe reason would prevail. Then, the following Wednesday, the mail carrier's truck stopped in front of their house. A moment later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the usual mail delivery. The carrier stood on the porch, holding a certified letter and a digital scanner. "For Clinton Dorsey," she said, her expression neutral. Denise signed for it. The envelope was stiff and official. With the return address of a law firm, he didn't recognize Cagle and Finch, LLP, attorneys at law. His heart sank. This wasn't a discussion. This was an escalation. Inside the stiff envelope was not a response to his reasoned arguments, but a cold, formal declaration of war. The letterhead was heavy, embossed with the law firm's name. The language was dense with legal jargon, but the message was brutally clear. Official notice of violation. The document outlined the same violation of CC&R 8.4.2. It referenced his email, dismissing his evidence with a single, chilling phrase. The homeowner's rationale does not supersede the explicit requirements of the governing documents. The courtesy phase was over. The letter stated that the board of directors had met, reviewed his case, and formally found him to be in violation. The remedy was no longer a request. It was a demand. You are hereby directed to remove the unapproved structure and restore the property to its original condition within 14 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in further enforcement action as permitted by the association's bylaws and Georgia state law. At the bottom of the page, a new line item appeared, one that made Clinton's blood run cold. Pursuant to the authority granted in the CC&Rs, an initial fine of $100 has been levied against your account. This fine is due and payable immediately. It wasn't the amount that shocked him. It was the clinical, punitive nature of it. They weren't just disagreeing with him. They were punishing him. $100, Denise said, her voice tight with disbelief as she read over his shoulder. They're fining you for protecting our house. Clinton's jaw clenched. It's not about the money. It's a power play. They're establishing a record. This is step 2. His first instinct was to call the law firm, but he knew they would be an impenetrable wall of billable hours. His target was the management company. He dialed the number for Action Property Management and asked for Kyle Brenner. After a few minutes on hold, Kyle's reedy voice came on the line. Action Property Management. Kyle speaking. Kyle, it's Clinton Dorsey at 128 Magnolia Trace. I just received a formal violation notice via certified mail. There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of typing. Ah, yes, Mr. Dorsey. I see the record here. The notice was sent following the board's decision. The board's decision. I sent a detailed email with photos and video evidence last week. Did the board even see it? Kyle's voice adopted the smooth, non-committal tone of a man trained to de-escalate while conceding nothing. All correspondence from homeowners is provided to the board for their review. Yes. So they saw the proof that the berm is working, that it's preventing flood damage, and they decided to fine me anyway. Mr. Dorsey, Kyle said, his voice lowering slightly. My role is to implement the board's directives. The board reviewed the matter and, based on the governing documents, found the structure to be a violation. They are unified on this issue. Unified. The word hung in the air. It meant Geraldine had convinced the other two board members, Janice Pruitt and Harold Green, to fall in line. It meant his evidence, his logic, had been irrelevant from the start. So what am I supposed to do? Kyle, just let my house flood to satisfy a line in a binder. The notice outlines the required remediation, Kyle said, his voice a perfect monotone. You have the right to request a hearing before the board to state your case in person. The instructions for requesting a hearing should be included in the documentation you received. Clinton looked down at the letter. There it was. A small paragraph outlining the formal, bureaucratic process for appealing to the very people who had already judged him. It was a closed loop, a system designed to exhaust and defeat, not to find solutions. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only official path he had left. Fine, Clinton said, his voice hard. Consider this my formal request for a hearing. Of course, Mr. Dorsey, Kyle replied, his tone brightening now that the conversation was moving back into the realm of official procedure. I will process your request, and you will receive a formal notice of hearing with the scheduled date and time via mail. Have a great day. The line clicked dead. Clinton stood in his kitchen, the legal notice in one hand and the silent phone in the other. The trap had been sprung. The system was working exactly as intended. He had 14 days until the deadline, and a hearing that already felt like a formality. The fight was no longer about dirt and rocks. It was about his family's future in Oak Haven. For the next 2 weeks, the Dorseys' dining room table became a war room. Clinton was determined to walk into that hearing not as a desperate homeowner, but as a man armed with undeniable facts. He would not be emotional. He would be methodical. He would use the system's own language logic, evidence, documentation against it. His first step was to create a comprehensive timeline of the flooding. He spent hours digging through old digital photos, finding images from previous storms, the murky water pooling at the basement door, the ruined carpet pulled up and piled on the lawn, the silt-covered patio. He printed each one in high resolution, labeling them with dates and a brief description of the damage. Next, he approached his neighbors for support. He didn't want hearsay. He wanted written statements. He found Shirley Ramos tending to her now thriving garden. Her gratitude was palpable. Clinton, of course I'll write something for you, she said, wiping her soil-caked hands on her apron. This is the first summer in 10 years I haven't lost my entire tomato crop. You write down what you need me to say, and I'll sign it. He typed up a simple, factual statement for her, detailing her past losses due to runoff and the complete absence of flooding since the berm's construction. She signed it with a flourish of her pen, Frank Ellery was even more emphatic. When Clinton explained the situation, the retired surveyor let out a low whistle. They're citing 8.4.2. That's for people who build retaining walls that dump all their water onto their neighbor. You did the opposite. This is malicious enforcement. Frank sat down at his own computer and typed a letter that was far more technical and authoritative than Clinton could have hoped for. He cited his 30 years of experience with the Cobb County Surveyor's Office, explained the hydrological principles at play, and concluded that Clinton's berm was a net positive for the subdivision's surface water management. He printed it, signed it, and handed it to Clinton. Let's see Geraldine argue with a professional assessment. While he gathered his evidence, Denise took on the governing documents. She downloaded the full PDF of the Oak Haven CC&Rs, the architectural guidelines, and the bylaws. They spent 2 nights with highlighters, poring over the dense legalese. They highlighted Section 8.4.2, the rule the board was using as their sword. But then Denise found something else, buried deep in the section on association duties. "Clinton, look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. It was Section 9.1.5. The association shall be responsible for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the common areas, including the upkeep of all surface water drainage facilities located thereon to ensure their proper function. Clinton read it, then read it again. "The easement swale behind our house is a common area drainage facility." "Exactly," Denise said, a spark of excitement in her voice. "And when was the last time they maintained it?" Frank said. "It's been eroding for years. It's clogged with debris and silt. They're trying to fine you for violating a rule about drainage, when they themselves are violating a rule by failing to maintain the drainage system in the first place." It was the perfect counter-argument, a shield to their sword. Clinton felt a surge of confidence. He had photographic evidence. He had signed credible witness statements, one from an expert. And now, he had the board's own rules to hold them accountable. He carefully organized everything into a neat, professional-looking binder with tabbed sections, photographic history, neighbor testimonies, and governing document analysis. He believed in the fundamental fairness of things. He believed that if you presented a clear, logical case, people like Geraldine Kavanaugh would have to acknowledge the truth. He was walking into that hearing to have a reasonable discussion, armed with irrefutable proof. He was prepared for an argument. He was not prepared for a show trial. The hearing was held on a Tuesday evening in the sterile, beige-walled meeting room of the Oak Haven clubhouse. The air was thick with the scent of industrial cleaner. Clinton sat at a long folding table, his meticulously prepared binder open before him. Across from him sat the bored Geraldine at the center, flanked by Janice Pruitt, a woman who seemed to blend into the wallpaper, and Harold Green, a stout man who continually cleared his throat as if preparing to speak, but never did. Kyle, the property manager, sat at the end of the table with a laptop, tasked with taking the official minutes. Geraldine called the meeting to order, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "This is a hearing requested by Mr. Clinton Dorsey of 128 Magnolia Trace regarding a violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2. Mr. Dorsey, you have been allotted 5 minutes to state your case." "5 minutes," Clinton asked, gesturing to his binder. "I have evidence to present. It will take longer than 5 minutes to review it properly." "The board is already familiar with the basic facts of the case," Geraldine said coolly, glancing at the small digital clock on the table. "Your time begins now." Clinton took a deep breath, pushing down his frustration. He started with the photos, laying them out on the table. "As you can see from these images, my property has been subject to significant water damage for years. This isn't a minor issue. It's a threat to the structural integrity of my home and the health of my family." Janice Pruitt glanced at the photos without comment. Harold Green squinted at them. Geraldine didn't look at them at all. "Your time is ticking, Mr. Dorsey," she said. Clinton moved on, pushing the signed statements from Shirley and Frank across the table. "These are statements from my neighbors. Ms. Ramos confirms the berm has completely solved the flooding in her garden. And this one. From Frank Ellery, a retired county surveyor, states that the berm is a net positive for the community's drainage." Geraldine picked up Frank's letter, holding it by the corners as if it were contaminated. She skimmed it, her lips a thin, unimpressed line. Mr. Ellery is entitled to his opinion as a resident. However, his former employment does not grant him authority over this board. She placed the letter back on the table, dismissing 30 years of professional expertise with a flick of her wrist. And Ms. Ramos's gardening success, while lovely, is anecdotal and not relevant to the violation. Clinton felt his carefully constructed confidence beginning to crumble. This wasn't a review. It was a systematic dismantling of his case. He made his final, most crucial point, tapping the highlighted copy of the CC&Rs. "Section 9.1.5, he said, his voice rising slightly. "It states that the HOA is responsible for maintaining the common area drainage facilities. The swale behind my house has been neglected for years. It's eroded and ineffective. I built the berm to mitigate a problem the association itself has failed to address." For the first time, Geraldine's icy composure showed a crack. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "The board allocates maintenance funds based on priority. Mr. Dorsey, your attempt to deflect blame is noted." She looked at the clock. "And your time has expired." She turned to her fellow board members. "The board has heard the homeowner's testimony. Is there a motion?" Harold Green cleared his throat, looked at Geraldine, and mumbled, "I move to find the homeowner in violation as per the notice." "Is there a second?" Geraldine asked. Janice Pruitt nodded silently. "All in favor." 3 hands went up in unison. It was over in less than 30 seconds. "The motion carries. 3-0, Geraldine announced, her voice ringing with finality. "Mr. Dorsey, you are found liable. The original demand for removal of the structure within the specified time frame stands. Furthermore, the board approves the levying of a continuing fine of $100, 100 pesos per day, effective immediately, until the property is brought into full compliance." Clinton stared at them, stunned into silence. $100 a day. It was a ruinous, suffocating penalty designed for one purpose: to crush him into submission. He slowly gathered his photos, his statements, his highlighted documents. The evidence didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. The hearing was a sham, a piece of procedural theater staged to legitimize a decision that had been made weeks ago. As he stood to leave, his binder feeling impossibly heavy, Geraldine looked at him, a strange, almost pitying expression in her eyes. "Some people," she said, her voice low and carrying a weight of unspoken history, "never learn to respect what others have worked so hard to build." The comment was odd, deeply personal, and completely out of place. It wasn't about a rule or a berm. It was about something else entirely. A past grievance he couldn't begin to fathom. He walked out of the clubhouse and into the humid night air, the weight of the daily fines already settling on his shoulders. He hadn't just lost the hearing. He had stumbled into a fight he didn't understand, against an enemy whose motives were buried deeper than any property line. The daily fines were a slow drip torture. Each morning, Clinton would wake up and do the math. The debt was a living thing, growing by $100 every 24 hours. After a week, It was $700. After two, it had climbed to $1,400, surpassing their monthly mortgage payment. It was an invisible weight that sat on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The pressure was immense, radiating through their home and fraying the edges of their family life. He grew short-tempered, snapping at Terrell over a spilled glass of milk. He and Denise started having hushed, tense conversations late at night. The checkbook and bank statement spread between them on the kitchen table, like a patient on life support. "We can't keep this up." "Clinton," Denise said one evening, her voice strained, "at this rate, we'll burn through our savings in a month. What happens then?" "I don't know," he admitted, rubbing his tired eyes. The feeling of helplessness was a poison. Then, 16 days after the sham hearing, the final escalation arrived. It was another certified letter, this one thicker and heavier than the last, from the HOA's attorneys at Cagle and Finch. Clinton's hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. The title was in bold, capitalized letters that seemed to scream from the page, "Notice of intent to file a claim of lien." The legalese was dense, but the threat was existential. The letter stated that his account was now delinquent in the amount of $1,600 in fines, plus attorney's fees that had been tacked on, if the full amount was not paid, and the violation not cured within 30 days. The association would file a lien against their property. A lien. The word landed like a physical blow. It meant the HOA would have a legal claim on their house. They could, eventually, foreclose and sell the property to satisfy the debt. They could take his home. This was the checkmate move. They had pushed him from a simple disagreement over a pile of dirt to the very real possibility of losing everything he had worked for. That night was his lowest point. Denise sat beside him on the sofa, the lawyer's letter trembling in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "It's just a berm, Clinton," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's dirt and rocks. It's not worth our house. It's not worth Terrell growing up with this stress. Please, just give them what they want. Tear it down." He looked at her, at the fear and exhaustion in her eyes, and the fight went out of him. She was right. He had tried to be principled. He had tried to fight with logic and reason. But he was fighting a machine that didn't care about reason. He was fighting Geraldine's hidden vendetta, and he had led his family to the edge of a cliff. He felt utterly defeated, isolated, and trapped. He nodded slowly, the movement feeling like a surrender. "Okay," he whispered. "You're right. I'll start tomorrow." He felt a profound sense of shame. He had failed. The next morning, Frank Ellery saw him standing in his backyard, staring at the berm with a shovel in his hand and a look of hollow despair on his face. Frank walked over, his expression grim. "I saw the letter carrier yesterday," Frank said quietly. "Law firm again." Clinton just nodded, unable to speak. "It's a lien notice, isn't it?" Frank guessed. "Intent to file," Clinton corrected, his voice raspy. "They're going to take the house." "Frank." Frank's face hardened. He looked from Clinton's defeated posture to the berm, then back again. "No," he said, his voice a low growl. "No, they are not. This stops now. This isn't about a rule anymore. This is racketeering with a letterhead." The retired surveyor, a man who had spent his life dealing with plats, deeds, and the unyielding logic of boundary lines, was visibly furious. "I'm not just your neighbor anymore, Clinton. I'm your investigator. I spent 30 years at the county recorder's office. I know the people. I know the archives. And I know that every dirty little secret in this county has a paper trail. Give me until the annual meeting." The Oakhaven annual homeowners meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the one meeting a year where the general membership could speak, vote, and hold the board accountable in a public forum. "What can you do in 2 weeks?" Clinton asked, a sliver of hope cutting through his despair. Frank's eyes glinted with a cold fire Clinton had never seen before. "You'd be amazed what you can dig up," he said, "when you know exactly where to look." The clubhouse was packed to capacity for the annual meeting, the air humming with a mixture of civic duty and whispered gossip. Extra folding chairs had been set up. And still, people stood along the back wall. Everyone knew the unofficial main event on the agenda was the Dorsey situation. Clinton sat with Denise in the third row. He wore a simple button-down shirt. No tie. He held a single flash drive in his hand. He felt a calm resolve settle over him. The nervous energy had burned itself out, leaving only a steely focus. On the podium, at the front of the room, next to a pitcher of water, was a large digital timer, its red numbers glowing 0500. The open forum speaking slots were strictly enforced. Geraldine, flanked by Janice and Harold, called the meeting to order. She moved through the budget reports and landscaping contracts with brisk efficiency, her tone projecting an aura of absolute control. When she finally announced the open forum, she looked out at the crowd. "Each speaker will have 5 minutes. The first to have registered is Clinton Dorsey." A hush fell over the room. Clinton walked to the podium, inserted the flash drive into the connected laptop, and took a deep breath as his presentation appeared on the large projector screen behind him. He looked at the timer, then at the homeowners. He did not look at Geraldine. "Good evening," he began, his voice even and clear. "My name is Clinton Dorsey, and I live at 128 Magnolia Trace. Most of you know my story, or, at least, the board's version of it." He clicked to the first slide, a simple, clean image of the formal violation notice. The timer started its silent descent. 4:58, 4:57. "I was cited for violating Section 8.4.2 for building a berm to stop the flooding that has plagued my property and my neighbors for years. I was fined, found liable in a hearing, and I now face a lien on my home. The board has argued that I broke the rules. Tonight, I want to talk about the rules they broke." 4:30. He clicked to the next slide. On one side was the text of FERWA 8.4 Pro. On the other was FERWA 9.1.5, the rule requiring the HOA to maintain common area drainage. Below it, he projected a series of photos Frank had taken just last week, the drainage swale behind his house, choked with weeds, silt, and years of accumulated debris. "The board fined me for altering drainage while failing their own mandatory duty to maintain that same drainage system. They punished the symptom while ignoring the disease. This isn't enforcement. It's a dereliction of duty." 3:55. Murmurs rippled through the audience. "The board based its violation on the location of my berm relative to the common area easement. This is the map they use." He projected a clean, simple map provided by Action Property Management. "And this," he clicked again, "is the official plat map, certified by the Cobb County Recorder of Deeds, obtained by Frank Ellery last week." 3:20. A more complex, detailed map appeared on the screen. He overlaid the two. The official easement line was visibly 5 feet narrower than on the HOA's map. The board has been operating and levying violations based on an inaccurate map. But it gets worse. He zoomed in on a different section of the map. A property, 2 streets over, belonging to a Mr. Albright, a known friend of another board member. An expensive, unapproved flagstone patio extension clearly encroached 7 feet into the actual common area easement. 2:50. This was his moral crossroads. He knew, from studying the map with Frank, that Shirley Ramos's beloved rose trellis was technically 18 inches inside the true easement line on her property. He saw her in the audience, her face etched with worry, trusting him, in a split-second decision. He adjusted the zoom on his presentation, focusing tightly on the Albright patio violation and carefully keeping Shirley's lot out of frame. He would not win his war by creating a casualty of one of his own allies. This patio was built 2 years ago. Clinton stated calmly, no violation was ever issued. This is the definition of arbitrary and selective enforcement. The board is not upholding community standards. It is choosing when and where to apply them. Gasps and angry whispers filled the room. Trevor Langley, the resident who had so staunchly defended the rules, stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. 2:15. Now, about that patio. I was curious why it was approved. So, following state statutes, we filed a request to review the board's meeting minutes from that time. The next slide showed a copy of the minutes. He had received a page with a large section, crudely blacked out with a marker. This is what they gave us. The justification for approving the Albright patio was redacted, citing attorney-client privilege. 145. But there's no privilege when the association's business is a matter of public record for its members. He took another breath. Mr. Ellery was able to obtain an unredacted copy from a former board member who resigned in protest over this very issue. He clicked. The screen now showed the full, unredacted text. The room fell silent, reading the words projected in sharp black and white. 110. Motion to approve the Albright patio alteration, acknowledging minor easement encroachment, on the grounds of providing an emergency flood prevention measure to protect the home's foundation. The hypocrisy was stunning, hanging in the air like smoke. They had approved an almost identical alteration for a friend, using the exact justification emergency flood prevention that they had summarily dismissed in his own case. The timer showed 0:45. Clinton turned from the screen to face the board directly. He looked past Janice and Harold and met Geraldine's furious gaze. His voice was quiet now, but it carried across the silent room. The evidence is clear. The board has failed its duties, used inaccurate records, practiced selective enforcement, and hidden its own precedents. The only question left is why. Why was my property singled out with such aggression? I won't speculate on personal motives. I'll leave that to the independent audit I trust you will now demand. 0:10. He looked back at the homeowners. My 5 minutes are up. The timer hit 0:00 for a heartbeat. There was absolute silence. Then, the room erupted. The stunned silence shattered into a wave of outrage. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, their anger directed not at Clinton, but at the 3 silent figures at the front of the room. Geraldine banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the tumult. Order. This is not a debate, she yelled, but her authority had evaporated. Frank Ellery's voice boomed over the noise. Point of order. Madam President, I make a motion from the floor. The room quieted slightly to listen. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board of directors. I further move that all fines and legal actions against the Dorsey property be suspended indefinitely, pending the results of a full, independent forensic audit of the board's records, communications, and financials for the past 3 years. And finally, I move to schedule a special meeting for a full recall election of the board. Second, a dozen voices shouted at once. Geraldine's face was ashen. That motion is out of order. According to Section 4.7 of the bylaws, Frank retorted, holding up a copy. Any member can make a motion from the floor at the annual meeting. It requires a second and a majority vote. We have the floor. Kyle, the property manager, looked visibly shaken, his eyes darting between the angry crowd and Geraldine. This was a nightmare scenario for his company. He stood up, whispering urgently to Geraldine. A brief, frantic discussion took place. Finally, Kyle stepped to the microphone. "A vote will be taken," he announced, his voice trembling slightly. "All in favor of the motion, as stated by Mr. Ellery." A forest of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. All opposed. 3 hands rose: Geraldine, Janice, and Harold. The motion passed. The residents had taken back their community. The fines and the threat of the lien were gone, suspended in the wake of the public rebellion. The management company was put on formal notice, their contract now under review. Clinton felt Denise squeeze his hand, her knuckles white. It was over. He had won. Later that night, the adrenaline finally fading, Clinton and Denise sat on their porch. The air was unnaturally still and heavy. In the distance, lightning flickered silently behind a bank of dark clouds. "You were amazing," Denise whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "You didn't raise your voice. You just told the truth." Frank found the truth. He corrected. "I just presented it." Inside, the television murmured. The local news had switched to a special weather report. A meteorologist stood before a swirling, angry-looking weather map. "Upgrading this system to a major event," the meteorologist was saying, his tone grim. "We are now looking at a Category 3 atmospheric river event, expected to stall over the metro area for the next 48 hours. Widespread. Severe flash flooding is now not just a possibility, but a certainty." Clinton looked at Denise. Then his gaze drifted to the back of his yard, to the sturdy, life-saving berm that was still. Technically, in violation of the rules, the storm he had warned them about was here, and his dam was still standing. The storm that hit Oakhaven was biblical. Rain fell, not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets. It was the kind of deluge that erases the lines between road and lawn, between creek and cul-de-sac. It was the exact scenario Clinton had built the berm to withstand. And the berm held. Throughout the night, Clinton watched as the water rushed down the slope behind his house, meeting the packed earth and stone. It did exactly what he'd designed it to do. The flow split, diverted harmlessly into the center of the drainage swale, which, though neglected, was able to handle the channeled flow. His basement remained bone dry. Shirley Ramos's garden was untouched. Frank Ellery's driveway was clear. The rest of the subdivision was not so lucky. The area near the Albrights' unapproved patio, where the natural drainage had been improperly altered for aesthetic reasons, suffered a catastrophic failure. Water, unable to flow correctly, backed up and poured into 4 neighboring homes, flooding basements and garages. The very disaster Geraldine's board had rubber-stamped for a friend had come to pass, while the structure they had tried to legislate out of existence had performed its duty flawlessly. When the rain finally subsided, the community, now united behind Clinton, organized its own volunteer cleanup effort. He didn't direct them. He simply worked alongside them, hauling ruined drywall from a neighbor's basement and helping another family pull their waterlogged car from a ditch. The line between his fight and their fight had been erased by the flood. Weeks later, the results of the independent audit were presented at the special recall meeting. The findings were damning. The financial mismanagement and selective enforcement were laid bare for all to see. But the final surprise was buried in a forensic analysis of Geraldine Kavanaugh's emails. The auditors had uncovered a correspondence between Geraldine and a commercial developer, a personal friend of her late husband. This developer was in the final stages of acquiring the large, undeveloped tract of land adjacent to Oakhaven's common area. His preliminary permit applications with the county were contingent on the existing water runoff patterns remaining unchanged. Clinton's berm, small as it was, would have technically altered the hydrology of the drainage easement, requiring the developer to submit new, more complex, and expensive environmental impact studies. Geraldine's crusade hadn't just been about a personal grudge stemming from a business deal lost by her husband to Clinton's father decades ago, a fact the audit also uncovered. It had been about actively protecting her friend's financial interests at the expense of her own neighbors. She was using the HOA's rules to prevent Clinton from solving a flooding problem, because the problem itself was profitable for her associate. Faced with irrefutable proof of her conflict of interest, Geraldine resigned before the recall vote could be held. The rest of the board followed suit. A new interim board was elected, with Frank Ellery as its president. Their first official act was to pass the Dorsey Resolution, a formal commendation of Clinton for his foresight and a public apology for the actions of the previous board. Their second was to commission a full engineering study to properly fix the subdivision's drainage issues, using Clinton's berm as the model. One cool autumn evening, months later, Clinton stood on his back porch. The air was clean, the ground was dry, and the neighborhood was quiet. He was now the head of the new Architectural Review Committee, tasked with rewriting the rules to be based on common sense and community well-being, not punitive control. He looked out at the modest berm at the edge of his property. It was more than a pile of dirt and rocks. It was a testament, a quiet monument to the idea that a single, principled stand, rooted in the simple desire to protect one's family, could be strong enough to hold back a flood, expose a lie, and rebuild a community from the ground up.